Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com presents the Strength Coach Podcast, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. PerformBetter.com.
All right, hey everybody, welcome to episode 303 of the Strength Coach Podcast, the official podcast of Michael Boyle's StrengthCoach.com, the world's best source for strength and conditioning information, brought to you by Perform Better, the experts in functional training and rehabilitation. The app is live. We will talk more about that in a little while. All right, I'm your host, Anthony Renda. The show notes are located at ContinueFit.com. It's my site where you can find out more about my book, Be Like the Best. You can get the show notes and anything else that I'm doing. You can go to ContinueFit.com for more information. All right, today we've got a kind of a special episode with a kind of combination of the StrengthCoach.com Coach's Corner and the Naamly Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment. Naamly is our new sponsor. They are a member experience platform for the modern training gyms. Helps you to build lasting relationships with your members so they stay longer and pay longer, now more important than ever. It's an incredible tool that puts all of your communication with your members in one place, and it allows you to keep track of that communication, which is obviously so important for retention. You know, I've talked about it before. We hear so much about marketing, but rarely about retention. And that's what keeps people, obviously, and that's what we want. We want these people to stay longer and pay longer. And this is the tool that helps you build lasting relationships with your members. Obviously, so important. You want to build that community. You want to build that culture. This helps you do that. Go to Naamly.com, Naamly.com. You could schedule a free demo. That's what I did. And you'll get a feel for what they can do, what you can do at your gym. If you use the referral code, Strength Coach, you'll get a free 30-day trial. All right, so today, like I said, this is kind of a special combination episode. Coach Boyle wanted to get on Bobby Stroupe, and Bobby is the founder and president of Athlete Performance Enhancement Center, APEC, 2 locations in Texas. He also trains Patrick Mahomes, and Bobby was very influenced by Gary Gray and Gary Gray's system, and he did a presentation recently about his system that Coach Boyle saw. He loved it, and he just wanted to get on the phone with him, first of all, and then Coach just thought it'd be a good idea to do a joint interview for the show and for StrengthCoach.com. So we talked about Gary's influence on both coaches and how it all started with both of them having athletes that were having problems. Obviously 30 years apart, probably 20 years apart at least. Where Coach Boyle saw a disconnect with the system, how Bobby overcame some of those same things that Coach Boyle had a problem with, and to turn it around in his system. He's going to talk about the functional training grid. This really kind of a light bulb went off in Coach Boyle's head. He's seen it before, just never was able to work with it, and saw how Bobby's using it, and it started to click, especially with what they're doing at MBSC now, post-COVID. So they're going to talk all about that. It's an important piece. How the system is more than just a warm-up. And then Bobby's going to wrap it up with some recommendations for using the system with other systems, that's your system, and just taking what is useful out. All right, for the Train Heroic Data-Driven Coaching segment, Tim and Adam will discuss rate of perceived exertion or reps in reserve, and getting back to a little bit of training topic here on this one today. Don't forget, Coach Boyle and I both use Train Heroic to deliver all of our online training, and they have plans that start as low as $10 a month, depending on how many people you have. They also have a free 14-day trial, and they do an amazing job of ramping you up. You get like a phone call / Zoom call, webinar, whatever, with somebody, and they really teach you what the system is all about as well, kind of like what Naamly does as well. So it's just the way to go right now and to do that. If you mention we sent you, you'll get a 4-week athlete development program in your account, absolutely free. So that helps too, kind of get a feel for what they're doing. And Coach Boyle, that's actually one of Coach Boyle's programs. So if you're a coach looking for the best online training solution in the game, go to trainheroic.com to take your free 14-day trial today. For the Certified Functional Strength Coach segment with Brendan Rearick and Kevin Carr, Kevin's going to continue their 7-part series on movement as medicine. And in part 5, he's going to talk about strength training and depression. All of these topics that these guys have been talking about are really important for you guys to be able to communicate to your clients really good for buy-in. These are really just mostly obviously for general population stuff, but just some really great stuff that you really can understand and communicate to your clients for buy-in. For the Fit to Speak segment with Jenny Rurick, she's going to continue her series on the 4 elements of great communication. And Jenny's going to talk about the importance of being able to read a room, and she's going to outline the questions that you should ask in order to do it successfully. All right, so we're going to turn it around this time. Since Coach Boyle, we're doing the combination interview. We're going to put that at the end. So we're going to start out with the Certified Functional Strength Coach segment. So lots of things to get to. Let's get on the phone with Kevin Carr.
Welcome to the Certified Functional Strength Coach segment. My name is Kevin Carr, and today we're on part 5 of our 7-part series titled Movement is Medicine, where we discuss the wide array of benefits that exercise has on our physical, emotional, and psychological health. Everybody out there knows the benefits that exercise has on our bodies, but less people are familiar with how exercise impacts our brains. This week, we're going to discuss how exercise can have a positive impact on people who are suffering from depression. Depression is one of the world's most common psychiatric disorders, affecting more than 350 million people worldwide. Researchers estimate that approximately 1/3 of those people suffering from depression won't respond favorably to traditional antidepressant medications. Luckily, research is coming out to support the use of resistance training in the treatment of chronic depression. A recent meta-analysis out of the Journal of American Medicine stated that, quote, resistance training significantly reduced depressive symptoms among adults regardless of health status, total prescribed volume, or significant improvements in strength, end quote. This means that the reported symptoms in the participants in the trials were improved regardless of their other ailments, how much total exercise they did, or if they even got stronger during the study. Simply the fact that they were participating in strength training regularly positively affected their subjective reports on their condition. There are a number of theories as to why exercise has a positive impact on those suffering from depression, but like anything in the body, the answer is likely due to a multifactorial effect. Researchers have established that depression is directly linked to chronic inflammatory markers in the body, like C-reactive protein. In fact, people with clinically diagnosed depression routinely have up to 50% higher levels of C-reactive protein in their body than people who do not. So researchers believe that the anti-inflammatory nature of exercise could be the reason behind its ability to mitigate depressive symptoms. The bottom line is that what we train on the outside affects how we think and how we feel on the inside. Be proactive with your psychological health and be sure to consistently keep a few days of moderate intensity strength training and aerobic training in your routine and see how it affects your daily disposition. For more information, head on over to the blog at certifiedfsc.com for an article and some research all about the benefits of how exercise can improve your brain. Thanks for listening.
All right, guys, the wait is finally over. The Perform Better app is live. It features amazing presentations from this year's virtual summer seminar series, as well as some of the top presentations from the earlier functional training summits. And it was designed for professionals who train or rehab clients, patients, athletes, doesn't matter. It features education from some of the world's best trainers, including everybody we have on this show, Coach Boyle, Brendan Vera, Kevin Carr, myself. And basically, it's all free. And you'll be able to learn from the industry's top leaders on topics like strength and conditioning, personal training, nutrition, business, program design, you name it, right in the palm of your hand. So get that at the App Store. Also, don't forget, Perform Better right now. The current sale is free shipping on any order over $49. So check out some of the best sellers and get free shipping. All right, check it out at performbetter.com.
Hey, this is Adam.
This is Tim.
Welcome back to the Train Hook Data-Driven Coaching segments.
Happy New Year, everyone. Yes.
This edition of 2021. Tim and I were chatting, and Tim, you mentioned that you've seen more RPE and RAR from our coaches lately.
Yeah, especially in the last, I'm not sure why, but in the last 6 to 8 months, a lot more RPE has shown up in our coaches' training, in their notes, in their instructions. They're looking to teach folks this. And I think there's a lot of value to training this way. both for the coach and for the athlete. But I think this is a good time kicking off the year, as this is kind of becoming more popular, to talk about what are some of the good things about programming RPE for athletes, opposed to what are some of the pitfalls that coaches or athletes might struggle with when executing, an RPR strategy or an RIR type deal. So let's start with first, probably, what the heck is this thing? And then let's jump into some of the good.
Yeah. So what we're talking about specifically with RPE in lifting is auto-regulating load selection based on RPE. So instead of saying, you're going to do sixes at, 75 or 80%, you might say sixes at an 8 RPE.
Yeah.
And so you don't have like a fixed load. You just are supposed to basically work at a level that is a certain level of difficulty for that day.
Yep.
RIR is more or less the inverse. It's not exactly the same thing, but kind of, you can think of an RP8 is basically a 2 RIR.
Yep.
Depending on what system you use, that can change a little bit, right? Like sometimes 8s are 2 or 3, reps left, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But that's the concept. So I tend to use RIR these days.
Okay.
Because it gets more at what I'm trying to communicate to somebody, which is I want you to leave 1 or 2 in a tank, that kind of thing.
Sure.
So I tend to go for that route. But yeah, so what are some of the good things about this? Well, one is that it just doesn't assume as much as some other programming methods, which is like, well, if you use linear weights or percents, you basically are assuming that athlete has made some certain progress since the last time they did it.
Right.
And 1 week to the next, like especially early in a cycle, you probably presume that just fine. But I could definitely tell you I've done programs in the past, in my younger days where I made it to the middle of the program and I hadn't made the progress, or something had happened where I just couldn't do it one day.
Right.
And it throws you for a loop because you're like, oh man, like I don't know what to do now.
Yeah.
And so RPE kind of takes that out because you just take what you have on a given day, right? Whatever you have on a given day, you do it.
Yeah. It kind of takes account of like the outside variables, right? Life going on. So your athlete doesn't feel like a total failure if they don't hit their 90%, right? You're still working towards that desired effect or that desired outcome. It may not be, optimal because you didn't hit a very specific percentage, but you're still progressing along that lines. And I love that kind of psychological factor that it gives the athlete a little bit of freedom. And I do love that. Well, I ran into issue. Go ahead, Adam.
Well, every training day is successful then. You go in and if you were prescribed 3x6 at RP8, you can say, oh man, this wasn't my best day, but I did that, and it was still good. That's the concept. That's part of that. To me, that's part of the concept anyway.
For sure. And I've never really programmed RPE and RIR for a couple certain reasons. What are some of the pitfalls in your opinion, Adam, before I chime in about why this might be difficult for some athletes or coaches to program this way?
Yeah, I think it comes down to using it with the right people and right context, right? So
bingo. Yeah.
It's hard for new lifters to accurately appraise this. Totally. They don't have a concept of what hard is. They don't, different exercises feel different. Like, taking lateral raises to failure versus squats, not really a comparison, right? That's going to be a lot different.
Yeah. So
they don't really know. They have, and either studies on this, that they aren't as good at estimating. Now, most people with some experience can get pretty good at like 8s and 9s or 1 or 2 reps. They can tell when they're getting close to fatigue, right?
Yeah.
I still don't know if I fully believe, and I've seen people who I respect who are good coaches who use this, is like, I still don't know how well people can really estimate like 5s or 6s.
5s or 6s, yeah. In the middle of the pack, right? And you can go either way. That's tough.
You're basically saying just stay away from fatigue. We'd say pretty far from fatigue at that point.
Yeah.
Failure.
And I think that learning curve is tough for me to teach the kids, you know what I mean? In my setting, it's just a lot.
Yeah, well, in your case, you were talking, hundreds of people, right? 600
athletes. It's just a lot. And like you said, teaching a freshman what an 8 RPE is tough. So
yeah, so that's a tough situation to use that in probably. But
right.
With some personal training clients, right? Like, it depends on the context, right? Especially we're talking about working remote right now. Like in person, it would be weird to say, go for it. Do
because you do that anyway, right? As the coach, you kind of auto air quotes regulate the weight for the person in person.
You do the load selection, so you're trying to teach them how to do this, basically.
Right.
But the remote setting, it's like, well, some of my Gen Pop people, I can definitely say like they would prefer to have really specific like goals or like
Same thing with the athletes, right? These young kids need very specific instruction. So
where when you get people who are more invested, more experienced, then they're more willing to play with these things, more interested in like, thinking a little more about it and being, because you have to educate them, I think.
Yeah, really globally understanding it. That's a good point.
And, I think Mike Teixeira said back in the day, the godfather of RP and lifting, and he said it works really well for these types that are like, he called them controlled aggressive, which is to say you have to want to get better, because you can just go to the gym and lift the same weights all the time and be like, I don't know, it was kind of hard.
Yeah, that's exactly.
You have to be seeking some progress. You're just using this like RPE to be like honest with yourself about how hard stuff really is.
Totally. Love it. That's
going to do it for us today. Do it at trainheroic.com. Start your 14-day free trial. We've got new pricing in there to start as low as $9.99.
Welcome to the Fit to Speak segment. My name is Jenny Rurick, and today I'm going to talk about the importance of situational awareness when communicating, which is a crucial element in the system of communication. In my last segment, I introduced the idea that communication is a system made up of 4 overarching elements and skills. Those include, in order, first, your ability to assess a situation or read the room. Second, your ability to build a message or organize the content of your message in response to what you learned in your assessment of the situation. Third, your ability to then translate your message, which includes deciding on the best vehicle to carry your message, as well as your understanding on the application, advantages, and disadvantages of that vehicle. And fourth, the delivery of your message. This includes things like supportive body language, how you manage the elements of your voice in order to be perceived in the way you need to be for your communication to be effective. Almost all of my relationships with my clients begin with the opener, I want to improve my communication. But again, communication is the system. What they really want to do is improve the components within the system of communication, as well as how those components interact with one another. Because to improve the whole, we need to focus on the parts. So today, we're going to focus on the first part, which is situational awareness, or your ability to read the room. I'm going to tell you why it's important, and then teach you how to assess any communication situation. The importance of situational awareness is hiding in plain sight. The word communication comes from a Latin word that means to make common. So ultimately, communication does not happen until we're able to message in a way that allows others to easily know what we know. But you can't make something common without first understanding what that person or group of people already know, what experience or perceptions they have, or even how they're feeling in that particular moment that you're communicating with them. It's the same reason why you avoid talking to your clients in anatomical terms, because you know that most people don't have any clue what the soleus is, so instead you say calf. And if you don't, please start doing that. Without being present to the person or people you're communicating with and the context of the situation you're communicating within, you're really just hoping to communicate instead of making communication happen. Situational awareness is your communication assessment. It serves the same purpose as your client intake forms and movement assessments. Its purpose is to give you the information you need in order to establish boundaries that you can safely operate within. Assessments narrow the playing field because they limit your options, which is extremely important. Assessments increase the chance of you hitting the mark because there are less variables to consider. In order to assess the situation, the communication situation, you need to ask questions, both of yourself and then of those you're communicating with. I'm now going to share what those questions are, and I've separated them into 2 categories. The first category is for moments or communications that happen in the moment. This is when you're in the midst of an interaction and you need to assess the situation quickly so that you can respond appropriately. The second category is when you have time to prepare in advance. So you haven't communicated your message yet, but you're planning to for an upcoming interaction, whether it be informal or formal. To assess the situation in the moment, or when you're in scenarios when you're in the midst of an interaction and you need to understand the context of both the person or people you're interacting with, as well as the environment. These are the 3 questions that I would urge you to consider or ask and answer. Question number 1, where do I want this relationship to be after this conversation is done? Or where do I want this relationship to be in the long-term future? What does that do? That puts you in the mindset of picking your battles. If the long-term goal of that relationship is to have strong rapport and build trust, you might not want to have a certain conversation or give criticism in this particular moment because you understand its impact on the long-term relationship, and vice versa. Question number 2 to consider. In one word, how would you describe how this person or these people are feeling in this moment? You might look around at the group or at the person you're speaking to and identify their feeling as distracted, excited, engaged, angry, frustrated, confused, whatever it might be. Knowing that, or at least taking a guess as to what they're feeling, will allow you to better filter out what's appropriate to say and what's inappropriate to say. And the third question for in the moment scenarios is asking, what information am I missing? Not only of yourself, but you can actually ask the person you're speaking to or the group of people, can you tell me more about blank? Or what do you want me to know about blank? Or another option is, I'm not sure I understand, and then ask them to explain further. So to recap, for in the moment scenarios or interactions, when you need to assess the situation quickly, the 3 questions you want to ask are, where do I want this relationship to be after this conversation or in the future? If I had to describe how this person or people were feeling right now in the moment, what word would I use? And third, what information am I missing? The second category for a communication assessment is when you have time to prepare, meaning you're planning for an upcoming interaction and you have time to think through what that interaction will look like and who you're going to be interacting with. And for this scenario, there are 5 questions. Question number 1, in the end, or when I'm done messaging, what do I need this person or this group of people to know, do, or believe? And these are the 3 main reasons why we message. So if you had to just pick one thing that you need this person to walk away knowing, doing, or believing, what would that be? Question number 2, how will their knowledge or feelings about me as a person impact my message? Basically, you're reflecting on whether you have any established or pre-existing credibility with this person or people, and that will determine what information you need to share and how you might share it. Question number 3, how will their knowledge or feelings about my topic impact my message? Same as the previous question, you're working to uncover what information gaps may exist between them and your topic, as well as their attitudes towards your topic. Question number 4, what are they expecting to hear? There needs to be congruency between what they're expecting and what you ultimately deliver to them. And then the 5th and final question, what might they resist about my message? If you know what people might resist, you can plan your responses ahead of time or be more strategic in the way you communicate the information. Let me leave you with a real-life story that demonstrates the importance of situational awareness on the ultimate effectiveness of communication. I first read about this story in the book Made to Stick by the Heath brothers. And the story is based in the 1980s in Texas. And at this time, Texas had a major littering problem. The Texas Department of Transportation spent more than $20 million annually just to clean up litter from the highways. They wanted to do something about it, so they started a campaign featuring a mascot called Woodsy the Owl. The slogan of the campaign was, "Give a hoot, don't pollute." And they spent a lot of money to run the campaign across multiple touch points. But after 2 years, littering actually got worse. And realizing that they were moving in the wrong direction, the Transportation Administration in Texas went to a group of academics for help. Can you guess what their first step was? They did an assessment. And what did they find out? They found out that most of the littering was being done by men between the ages of 18 and 34. Beyond that, they took the time to look at the attitudes and habits of this group of men. What they learned was that they were extremely proud of being from Texas. And now that the academics and the Department of Transportation was armed with that valuable information about who they were trying to speak to, they created a new campaign designed specifically for this group of men. That campaign, which is now trademarked and has become an identity in Texas, was "Don't Mess with Texas." It's a play on words, both in the littering fashion and also speaking to the pride that these men from Texas felt. And because it was so specific to the audience, it was successful. From 1987 to 1990, littering on Texas highways was reduced by 72%. So, what does it all mean? To improve your communication, start by improving your ability to assess the situation, either in the moment or if you have the time in advance. And you do that by doing an assessment. You ask questions. How can you get what you want by giving them what they need? That's what I have for you today. If you liked what you heard and you want access to a PDF that details what you just listened to, visit the Fit to Speak website, which is www.fit-to-speak.com. On the website, you can also get more information about one-on-one coaching with me and upcoming online courses and one day, hopefully, live events.
All right, now it's time for our special Naamly Hit the Gym with the Strength Coach segment, brought to you by Naamly, the ultimate retention tool designed specifically for fitness coaches and gyms to help your members stay longer and pay longer. Go to Naamly.com. That's Naamly.com. You can schedule a demo. It's what I did. You get a feel for what you can do with this incredible tool. Remember, retention, guys. It's all about retention, especially these days. Don't forget, use the referral code STRENGTHCOACH to get started on your 30-day trial. All right, so today we got on Bobby Stroupe, and Bobby is the founder and president of Athlete Performance Enhancement Center, which is APEC. And they built that from a grass field in 2005 to becoming a worldwide training leader in human performance today. He's the president of APEC, and they have 2 locations, Tyler and Fort Worth, both in Texas. And so right now, it's pretty cool. Currently supporting over 100 athletes in the NFL and MLB alone. A really cool thing that I was really loving when I read. APEC has been part of developing over 20 athletes who trained within its system from grade school all the way to professional ranks. Mike, you got to chime in on that in a little bit and see if you guys have a number on that with you guys too, because I know you've trained a lot of guys at a young age. But Bobby's also done a bunch of stuff for Nike, and he's as well as a human performance practitioner with a fellow of applied functional science, which is kind of the Gary Gray stuff. And that's kind of why Mike wanted to get Bobby on as well, because Gary was an influence of Mike early on with some of the functional training, and kind of went off track a little bit. And so Mike's going to talk about that as well. But Bob, let's start out with just giving us an overview, because, we do get a lot of Perform Better listeners, a lot of StrengthCoach.com members, and obviously we haven't had any of your stuff on there or in the Perform Better circuit. So wanted to get just an overview of your bio and how you got, how APEC came along and your influences.
Awesome. Well, first of all, after listening to that, it sounds like a whole lot more than it really is. So, man, I'm a product of a lot of good people and a lot of opportunities and a great team. My mom was a teacher. My dad was in the oil field. We moved around. I had great parents and a brother. Played sports growing up. I was the smallest kid in my grade, boy or girl, until probably sophomore year in high school. So it was just one of those very common dispositions of someone that gets into this field. And, really for me, it was just something that I always wanted from a young age, is to learn how to get better, because I wasn't very good. I mean, when you're the last kid picked on the playground, you have some selfish interest in this field. And so I kind of turned that into a passion and enjoyed training my friends in high school and college, and really knew I wanted to do this from a very young age. So, as far as an overview, man, there's a lot, but from an entrepreneurial standpoint, never really wanted to run a business, but got put in that situation. I started off working for physical therapists in a physical therapy clinic, kind of came full circle to that 8 years later when I went to do a fellowship with Gary, as mentioned. But I've just been fortunate. I worked for Hall of Fame football coach early in my career, and then had some fantastic mentors and early influences as well.
Very cool. And I see you were influenced by the, I got mine right by me. Like, it's amazing little handheld football thing. I did forget to mention, if Bobby, move out of the way just a little bit, show that box of cereal right there. You got a little Patrick Mahomes Magic Crunch. He does train Patrick Mahomes, who, for a hockey guy like me, I think he plays for the Charlestown Chiefs, right? So
some kind of chief. Yeah, you got that right. Somewhat.
So how tell us a little bit more, kind of getting into the Gary Gray stuff, Gary Gray and the fellowship. How did you fall into that? Was it an influence that you had working with a physical therapist?
Well, no, actually it was my experiences with physical therapy were poor, because when I started out, I was given kind of the misfits of the people that physical therapy didn't work with. And that was 16 years ago. I didn't have a facility, so that anybody that traditional therapy didn't work with, they just kind of pitch them to me. Like, there's no risk here. They're working with the cane, see what you can do. And so I learned a lot through that. But my early influences were really sport coaches. I had a CSCS strength coach at Division II level. I played college football, and I learned a lot from him. Tim Powers, Tudor Bompa, Dr. Yeses, Dr. Romanoff, Jim Radcliffe was the guy I looked up to. But overall, what happened is I just started having kids that were running into problems that I couldn't solve. And the therapists were I was getting them back from the therapist with the same problems. So I just felt a lot of circling going on. And that's when I decided to just do some research on how can I bridge these gaps better. I reached out to Todd Wright, who was at the University of Texas, and I read about some things he did with Kevin Durant that were, controversial, and just learned a little more about that and was able to get accepted into the gift program, and went all in, and it was a humbling experience, to say the least.
It's actually the exact kind of way Todd fell into it when he had a problem with one of his athletes, and then nobody could really, everything he was doing wasn't really working. And it wasn't until he went and visited with Gary that he helped him, and he realized, kind of a light bulb went off in his head. It was kind of an aha moment for him. And that's when he started working with Gary. So Mike, you want to chime in there on some questions about that?
Interesting. No, because it's the same situation for me. In this will be pre-Bobby, but Anthony will get the reference. Cam Neely, who's now the president of the Boston Bruins, was having a knee problem, and I reached out to Gary. We're talking in the 90s. So it was 92, 93, because same thing, we weren't having any results. We were going, they being the therapist and the athletic trainers at the Bruins, were going the conventional kind of, leg extension, leg press, calf raise, right, to try to solve his patellofemoral problem. And it just wasn't working. He was not getting better. His knee was swelling up. He was sore all the time. And I reached out to Gary through, of all people, Vern Gambetta. Vern was the one who initially said, hey, you should really talk to Gary Gray about this stuff. And I guess, and that's what made me, and I don't want to I can get lost in this, but this is what made me really interested with you, because I initially, like, I was fascinated by Gary's stuff, but then I went years later, I started to struggle with it because one, and this may or may not resonate with you, this started to get to be almost like a religious metaphysical thing to what he was doing, in terms of he wasn't answering science questions anymore. He was just kind of ducking them. And I still remember, I went with my sister-in-law to maybe, the transformation course, I forget what the actual title of the course was, but this was maybe 10 years ago with
Chain reaction.
Yeah. That I need to refresh this in my mind because I have some questions. And what happened to me is we started asking him questions, what I thought were hard questions, about, lumbar motion and about sort of excessive rotation. And, can we just simply decide to move a certain way and that the body goes the right way? And he just didn't answer me. He just, yeah, we'll get to that, Mike. We'll get to that. And I just felt, and I did the same thing with Dave Tiberio. I went through the same process. Like Dave, I need you to sort of justify or connect the dots between like Stuart McGill and Shirley Sarman and what you guys are talking about. And that was where I struggled. And Todd was the same way for me. Todd was the guy I saw, okay, Todd at least made this kind of make sense. Like he was able to take it and make it systematic. And that's why I was fascinated. I watched your TFC talk, and we've kind of gone back and forth on Twitter, but we don't really know each other. And I was like, wow, I'd never thought there was a Gary Gray influence to what Bobby was doing, but there was a really big Gary Gray influence to what you're doing, which I guess surprised me because you and Todd are the only guys I've seen in the performance world who've been able to kind of harness the thought process. So I guess, maybe if you can talk about that part, that would be cool for me personally.
Yeah, I think first off, for us, we're not very dogmatic in our approach, and we don't wholesale adopt things within our company. That our core philosophy is just to make decisions and kind of create. We have the freedom to do that, and I'll be the first to admit that when I got into this, I took some steps back before I was able to figure out what to do with it. The way I look at the Gary Gray and the gift approach and Dave Tiberio is that it's a lot like sprinkles on a cupcake. Okay, if you put too many sprinkles on the cupcake, you ruin it. But the sprinkles can be the thing that make it great. And I think that stuff is invaluable, but the application has always been, there's never been a lot of direction on application. In the performance realm, specifically where we are measured and monitored and graded on what we do, it's been more of a detriment to testing results and things like that because people go all in on a lot of things that don't affect some of the principles of human performance. One of the things I had to learn the hard way was to learn how to not compromise on the principles of human performance, but take these themes and concepts and actually define application that makes sense. And when I talked to Todd about it, he struggled with that too, because people murdered him for Kevin Durant's strength abilities and for some of the testing and measurables that Kevin had, respective to what they thought he should have coming out of a collegiate strength conditioning program. And I think Todd's brilliant, but I think it's a struggle for all of us when we first get some of those concepts to not go all in and spend all your time on it.
Yeah, I think I did a mentorship at Todd's place, and I think one thing that by this time they had been obviously working a lot on strength. So this was in, probably 2010. So I kind of went in there. Everything he was always talking about, you were always like, wait, where's the strength portion? But then when you actually went to the facility, you saw it. And they were doing Olympic lifts, and they were, they had Kaisers everywhere, and everybody just kind of thought they were doing lunge matrices with all the different tweaks. And I think that's where sometimes there's a misconception about what it is. Mike, can you just talk really quick about, so you had some success with Cam Neely doing what? Like from a performance perspective, what did you do? And then where was the disconnect? I know you said it was because they couldn't fix the other piece, but what about the stuff that you were doing with Cam? What exactly helped you?
Imagine, so Gary, really, if you talk about the father of functional training, Gary was the first guy to ever explain functional anatomy to anybody. So I can remember now, you talk about, it's 1994. So what's that, 26 years ago. So I'm about a 34-year-old kind of semi meathead strength coach coming out here and listening to this guy start talking about functional anatomy and talking about the fact that, hey, the quadricep doesn't extend the knee, the hamstring doesn't flex the knee, all these things are going on. And the difference for me is I'm eating it up because I had some conversations with Gary, like in Bobby, you might have heard a lot of this too, but Bobby definitely has, Gary's like tracks versus trains analogy with the patella, hey, you can't have patella tracking problems. Patella doesn't track. And all of that, like, because I was analytical enough, all of that made sense. And I was like, oh, you're absolutely right. Like, this is, they keep talking about, they're mobilizing his patella and they're trying to fix his patella. I'm like, his patella is just a sesamoid bone that's stuck in this quad mechanism. And it's just kind of going where the track tells it to go. It's sort of like you're trying to fix the train without fixing the track. And I guess that was my frustration. Like I made such a quantum leap as a coach. And when I think about what I believe in about functional training, all of that really came out of guys like Vern and Gary initially.
Right.
But then I felt like, I don't know, 2010, 2012 or whatever, when they tried to commercialize it, it took like a crazy left turn in terms of it just was, nope, this is the way that we do it. And we're not gonna try to, and I guess that I don't know if justify is the right word, but I just would like, because, Todd's whole thing was, I tried, like he probably tried like with backs, kind of the McGill approach, we did bridges and we did planks and we did this stuff and people didn't get better. And then, so my thing was, okay, for me, I'm always about like the common denominator. Bring me the common denominators here so I can understand, why is Shirley Sarman so caught up on the idea of relative motion and so caught up on the idea that we've got to be really careful, about, rotary motion at the lumbar spine and intervertebral discs. Because what I always want to find out is why, and I've written about this a lot, why don't all these super smart people agree? And why can't somebody kind of get them in the same room and say, okay, you need to explain to me why you don't believe that. Like, why do you think that's not happening when this person over here is absolutely positive that it is happening? And, Bobby's got a PT background too. I have people who say, the SI joint doesn't move. And the best physical therapist that I know in the world is like one of these guys who's, SI joint absolutely moves. And, if you're not, the whole thing is, if you don't evaluate the pelvis before you do everything else, then everything you do before that is a waste of time. Like, don't look at anybody's hip, don't look at anybody's knee, don't look at anybody's, foot, whatever. Look at their pelvis. If their pelvis isn't right, then nothing else is going to be right. And that was what made me, like, I really bought into the PRI idea because PRI made sense to me based on what I understood about anatomy, about the science of the whole thing. PRI was like, yeah, that makes sense. And take a step back, you probably didn't read it. I literally just posted an article today on Strength Coach site saying that, the idea that, we don't need to fix people that aren't broken was probably my big 2020 takeaway. I put up my 2013 stuff, and it was about breathing, about this, about that. And I realized, wow, whatever it is, PRI, so many of these things so many rabbit holes that we've been down, we kind of went down, looked around, walked back up, and we're like, yeah, there's really nothing down there. Went down another one, looked around, walked back up. There's really nothing down there. And eventually got back to like, hey, if somebody's not hurt, we don't need to worry about a lot of this stuff. And that's why I said I was super fascinated with Bobby's talk, because I was like, because I do think I went back now, I tried to find, and you may know the answer to this too, Bobby, functional training grids. You have them on the floor in your place. I can't, like, I'm all turf. I'm never going to be able to paint those down, but they don't even make that anymore, or at least I can't find it. Do you remember that?
We built a stencil. I mean, we literally take the board to a spray can and then went in a 1 foot diameter, 2 foot diameter, 3 foot diameter. And we don't just do them there. We just use those as visual maps for the athletes. So.
Well, I mean, but I thought for my adults, that would be really fascinating. Like if you had that in the warm-up area, it gives you, because I loved them in rehab. I always, whenever I get somebody who's coming back, whether it's an ACL or whether it's a hip or whatever that I'm dealing with, I go back and get my functional training grid out and drag it back out again, because I like you said, 1 foot, 2 foot. I like to be able to quantify exactly, okay, this is how far we went. This is how many degrees we were, and not kind of leave it to chance. But your talk made me think, man, I got to get 8 of these functional training grids so I can set them up in my warm-up area.
Bobby, can you explain to people who don't know what that is? What is the functional training grid?
So basically, if you can envision an X and a cross overlapping each other, or a T, that's going to give you 8 lines. Now, that's where you start. You stand in the middle with the cross section of those. And those 8 different lines are 8 different angles or vectors that you would move in. And to take that further for more directives and advancement, you just take a 1 foot diameter circle around the center, a 2 foot, and a 3 foot. So now you have, in effect, 24 dimensions or whatever you want to call them. And for our purposes, we want everyone to be able to reach, swing, step, lunge, jump, strike, anything we want. And these things can be manipulated by space and time and distance. For instance, some of the more advanced protocols we have in what we call our vector system is, I'll tell an athlete, you've got 3 seconds. I want as many contacts as you can go, 2 to 1. You have all 8 options. And so you give an athlete an opportunity to solve a problem. They've got a velocity-based scenario, and they have the freedom to move within space. And so that's a high-level advancement, but that's as far, I mean, you could go from taking someone post-op just to stepping in 8 points and putting pressure all the way to that extreme. And that's why we like it.
Mike, can you just talk really quick about where you felt like it went off the rails in that time when you said maybe 2010 or 11? Because if I remember correctly, maybe it's when it got, and you're always a big logistic guy and a teaching guy, so it was more about maybe some of the tweakology. There was too much stuff going on. Can you just talk about where it went off the rails so Bobby can kind of talk about, yeah, I went through that too, and here's what we did, because obviously Bobby has had success with this.
Yeah, some of it was really, I think, the jargon stuff where it was like, oh, the adductors are talking to the shoulder. I'm like, okay, I don't, like, I was like, I don't want to hear stuff like that. I want you to explain to me, what is the anatomical relationship of the adductor to the shoulder? Don't tell me that it's talking to the shoulder. Don't tell me if this doesn't work, we're just going to tweak it. Like I guess for me, I'm way too black and white. And so when, one of the things I wrote, that article I sent you that I never published, I said, when you go from the physical to the metaphysical, it becomes a problem, and I felt like they had moved into this kind of metaphysical area. And do you guys, well, again, all my analogies are old person analogies, but you might remember the Matthew Broderick remake of The Music Man. Did you ever see the original Music Man?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the original Music Man with Robert Preston, he talks about the idea that, we're going to learn to play the musical instrument by the think system. We're just going to think about the minuet in G, da, 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 da. And I felt like that's what I was getting from Gary and Dave at some points. Like, no, you just got to just think it and it's all going to happen. And I'm like, and I kept trying to get them, I kept going back to the talks and literally raising my hand, asking questions, and just getting, what I felt was buffaloed. Like, I was with my sister-in-law, Karen, and she kept writing me notes and handing them to me saying, they're not going to answer your questions. She passed me notes that stop asking questions. They're obviously ignoring you. They don't, I'd get another one. They don't want to answer that question. And I was it was frustrating because I was trying to figure out a way to approach it in a way that wasn't insulting to Gary, but was saying to Gary, like you're off the rails. Like, this is, you're not answering people's questions anymore. You've gone from, to me, he went from being like the smartest guy in the room at one point to this guy who thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, but thinks everybody else is really, really dumb, doesn't want to answer. So I was super frustrated, but that's why the big thing, Bobby, all of a sudden it reignites that interest in my head. Okay, the fact, when I watch Patrick, and you see sometimes the things that he does that you talked about, throwing off his back foot and doing some of these things, everything that's wrong, that's wrong. You're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to backpedal, and throw, you're not supposed to, be going 45 degrees sideways and then throw across your body. But I look at that stuff and say, this is actually some validation of the system when you look at it and think, because, we went through it. You didn't see it. You might've seen the Twitter thread, Anthony, but someone was saying, actually, Derek Hansen made some comment about Patrick not having good agility. And it was how can you possibly make that statement when you're watching the television? Like, if you look at that, you look and think, this guy's agility is like off the charts amazing in terms of what
it's too good. He uses it too much. He relies on it too much.
But not like the reverse of saying that he's like, it's not good, but it is seeing those, like I said, well, this is the other thing. One of my other beefs, jops, making words up. You know what I mean? Like, I used to say, like, you can't make words up. You can't be eccentrically concentric. You can't be, like they would do things in these classes where I'm like, no, okay, you can't just make up a term in a scientific area. Like, we're talking about whatever training, physical therapy, but they routinely did, and it was like, and so like I said, it was always frustrating for me. It was probably my biggest, if you ask me, my biggest source of frustration in the field, I would say absolutely positively the Gary Gray stuff. That's so your thoughts are fascinating to me.
Bobby, can you expand on then, kind of, let's say you're going up to consult with, going to MBSC to say, Mike, no, this is how we overcame it. This is what we're doing, because obviously you're having success with it. Answer to what Mike just talked about.
Yeah, I think first I had to change my perspective on what I was doing. I think so much in this field, we go see things and take what we want from it, and it's easy. But this wasn't that way. It created more confusion than when I initially went into it, as most people ended up with that really dedicated to getting into it. And so I had to shift my perspective into viewing this as more of treasure, right? So we would look at somebody funny if they just wore all gold all the time, right? But in the strength conditioning, we're that way a lot. Gary and Dave, I wish to honor them. I respect them. I'm appreciative of them. I think they have a lot of value. But I don't need to wear gold all the time. And I need to, you know what I mean? I need to understand that these guys are treasures and they should be valued, but they're not a religion. And I don't have to do everything that they think or say. Some of the issues that I ran into were similar to yours. They were pretty much application agnostic, which is frustrating to me because our entire profession is based around how do I apply this? What do? We do 5 sets of 6. We do, this for that. They had no correlation of do this to get that. It's always a presentation of, well, you can do this. Okay, well, when do I do it? I don't know. And it just blew my mind. So the way I started looking at it was literally like treasure. This is really good. Don't know what I'm going to do with it. I think I like it. I don't know if I value it in this situation. So I started thinking of it that way, and I felt less pressure to do those things and do all of those things because it's this infinite rabbit hole of time consuming, and if you just do those things, your athletes become feeble because you're neglecting things that matter. So as we went forward with it, I had to ignore the way I felt about their nomenclature. One of my biggest beefs with Gary and Dave is that their nomenclature is very personality specific to them. To say things the way Gary says, a lot of people just don't like that and they don't identify it. And let's be honest, it's unnecessary, but that's them. They don't want to compromise on that. But we got to be careful to not throw out a brilliant concept just because those things are, they can be ridiculous. We all do stupid stuff. We all say weird things, and that's their culture, and that's fine. But I was able to try to just take the time to try to get the value that I felt was best from the experience. And I'll tell you where the rubber met the road for me. I had a kid that had a plate in his ankle, several surgeries, running back, had an Achilles tear. We took this stuff to task with him in rehab. And what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to go back to my Olympic lifting. I'm going to go back to my max strength protocols. I'm going to go back to all this. And I'm just going to superset everything with something I learned from the fellowship. Everything. I'm talking everything. And the kid came back in 5 months and was quoted as being better and faster and more resilient. And that's when a light bulb went off for me that you don't forsake the principles of human performance that you learn and that because those guys didn't grow up in that, and they don't study that, and they don't look at the world like that. So I just quit ignoring the application influences from that, but just took the value from the concepts. And then we just went with it from there. I just decided I'm not going to follow any model at all, not Todd's, not anyone's. I'm just going to create, and we're going to test this responsibly. And that's kind of what led us to where we're at now.
And so does it become for you, is it like, I used to look at it and say, okay, a lot of this stuff is really warm up. Does it stay that way for you, or does it kind of seep its way into what you're doing? Because that was my other big beef, was that you know, when, like you said, when you're trying to get somebody strong, you can't move in 3 planes of motion. It's not safe to try to get somebody to add a rotational component to, you know, to a loaded exercise. And, you know, so I used to look at people and think, okay, same thing. Like, all right, where's like, you know, where's the break point? Like, at what point do we start to think, you know, I've crossed over from, you know, from interesting to unsafe, which is where, like, I was sometimes stuck in that spot. And sometimes that's why I kept finding myself at unilateral training, because with unilateral training, I could engage all these muscles as stabilizers the way I wanted them to. And maybe they were now, you know, when you think about, you know, anti-rotation or anti-extension or anti-lateral rotation, or, you know, preventing movement in the frontal plane. Like, I look at one leg squat and I tell everybody, one leg squatting is a triplanar exercise.
Absolutely.
Because you prevent motion in the frontal plane and you prevent motion in the transverse plane. You use muscles as anti-rotators, as stabilizers, while you move in the sagittal plane. So to me, I started to look at this and think, every time we get on one foot, we're doing 3-dimensional training, even if we're not necessarily adding, you know, by subtracting a transverse component, we're adding a transverse component. You know what I mean? Like, by preventing somebody from moving in the transverse plane. And that was how I kind of got around it. But like I said, I just was really interested. So with your stuff, is it, to talk to us organizationally, like, are you like, so for us, we're like, you know, warm up, power, strength, conditioning. I mean, that's kind of our sequence. Does this stuff seep over in every area? Does it, you know? Go ahead.
That's a good question. So we do have the same type of flow, Mike, is that we call our warm up our fuse, and we integrate a lot of the concepts into that. So before any athlete does any kind of speed work or no matter what we're doing that day, we're going to have triplanar movement and locomotion as part of that process. So that is one of the first exposures they get in the training session, regardless of what the focus is we're going to integrate some of these concepts immediately. And I try to eliminate the concept of a warm up, and I just call it a fuse, because we're training from the jump. And we move into power after movement, whether it's linear speed or just concepts or teaching or drills. So in power, what I'm typically going to do is I'm going to make sure that there's a velocity-based component to at least 2 things, and there's a stability component to another. And so just like what you said, a single leg exercise in our mind is frontal plane tweak. I don't need to do a wide squat in order to get a frontal plane movement. And we're going to integrate those concepts as we see fit, but we're going to get strong. I mean, I want our guys every 2 weeks to be exposed to plus 85% loads in a few different ways. So we're probably different in our programming in that I do 14-day blocks and rollover concepts and chart it out with strength residuals. And I also chart it out with planes of motion and vertical and horizontal movements. So it's probably more complicated than it has to be, but we've just found that makes it more interesting for us to check more boxes. And we see better strength gains with less volume. And we like to be able to make sure we expose our athletes to as many different variations of movement as possible. But just like yourself, we've decided that you can't maximally load 3 planes of motion. You can apply a lot of velocity-based components and concepts to the transverse plane. The frontal plane is best to load in unilateral concepts and stability concepts. In the sagittal plane, you can get strong and develop power. And so we basically build off those principles.
Just so you know, write that down. You got to write a book. Like, have you written? Are you in the process, or have you thought about writing?
I've thought about it. You know, Dan Path told me I should write a book, and we discussed some programming concepts and how I was laying it out. And you know, I'm about to the point where I can do that from a time standpoint, but I've just been so immersed in training, and just now in my career am I able to sit and focus on these things. But it is different. I mean, we're not following a pattern here. We're creating something. I don't know if it's good, but it seems to be working. at this
No,
point.
but that's the difference. It is. I mean, you say you don't know if it's good. It is good. There's no question. I mean, one, I always said, and Anthony talked about this, if you have homegrown kids who are making it to professional sport, then what you're doing is good, because I don't know that many people. We've had a bunch, almost all hockey players like there. We've had, but that's our, like, what's football and baseball to you is hockey to us. But we've had kids who started with us as 12-year-olds and went on, and, they're retired already from their NHL careers. So there's no question that part of it works. The good thing for you is you're in a much bigger hotbed from a football, basketball standpoint. The other thing I would say, for you too, one, try to figure out a way. I'm like giving an advice column here when I'm supposed to be asking you questions, but even if you try to write like 250 words a day, of explanation of your program, because I'll be honest with you, I'd buy it tomorrow. If you said, I got all this written down, in a book or even in a manual like that. Chris Poirier at Perform Better used to say to me, just make a manual, make a 30-page manual, make a 40-page manual. My first book was 3 of those manuals that I basically put together. The 3 put together were half of functional training for sports, because I really believe that, like, what you're talking about in terms of the integration, all the stuff that's going on in your head for the last however many years has value to people out there who are saying, okay, how do I do this? Like, I get it. Like, I understand. That's how the point I was at. Okay, I get it. And that was sort of, I used to try to talk to Todd all the time, but I just didn't have enough time to kind of hang out with Todd. And I probably should have just gone. Like, I went to his place once for, a couple hours, but I should have gone and stayed for a longer period of time and said, okay, hey, I'm going to try to really maximize my time here to take my thought process to the next level. So I really do think you should give that some thought. I know, as you said, Dan has said it, and I would second Dan's thought. Don't wait till you're, 60 or something to do it, when people are saying, yeah, he's the guy that used to train Patrick Mahomes, right? Like,
Mike,
do
you feel like when you heard Bobby's talk, like I said before, you're somebody who, in order to convince you to change or into a system, there's always the logistical component and there's always the coaching component. Can I teach people this? That's where the language comes in with you. You're like, this doesn't work for me. And then there's the logistical piece where you're like, okay, now you saw those grids and they're like, okay, wait, now we can teach those. We can put them in front of a pod. Is that have a lot to do with what Bobby's talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, for me, it's always that, because I look at everything like a college strength coach. Can I mass produce this? And that's the difference. I always said, like Gary's brilliance was always he could just watch somebody do something and be like, that's not working. Like, whatever it is, your foot, your knee, your hip, your T-spine, whatever. And I said, that's not a transferable skill in any great degree, particularly when you're trying to train a staff, when you're looking and saying, I'm going to try to do this with hundreds of people. But I was looking, like I was watching, Patrick on the grid, and just doing like the job stuff and thinking, if I had 8 grids, even with our adult clients, we could just say, okay, we're going to do, whatever, like you said, 8 points on the vector, with a, what we would call a lateral bound, basically 2 foot to a single foot landing, 2 foot to a single foot landing, but doing it in, when you can say to, like, if you try to say to somebody, hey, use compass points, and I want you to do north, and then I want you to do northeast, and then I want you to do east, and then I want you to do, east, south, whatever. It's like, that doesn't work. Right. But if you've got the grid, like you guys have it on the floor, I don't know did you paint on your floor or your turf? Sorry.
We painted on the floor.
Yeah. So we have, like, it's all turf where we are, right? Because the other thing is, for us, with the COVID thing, we've had to realign how we're doing warm-ups. But the reason I was kind of fascinated with what Bobby was doing is I'm thinking about, okay, what's the next generation of how we're going to run this because we're never going back from this COVID setup that we have right now, because it's actually more efficient than what we had before. But I want to look at it and think, are there ways to incorporate more kind of variability into the warm-up and ways to get some of this stuff put in? And that's why you say to people, like, people say, agility ladders are bad. I'm like, no, they're not. I mean, when you really think, I always say to people, I use the agility ladder, but I tell people, I want a sagittal exercise, I want a frontal exercise, and I want a transverse exercise. That's, if we're only doing 3 ladder drills, that's what I want to get. Like, I want you to cross your midline. I want you to do something sagittal, and then I want you to do something frontal, because it's the same idea. I'm getting you moving in 3 planes of, whatever, landing, hopping, skipping, stabilizing, however it works. So it's, I just, as I said, this to me, and I told Bobby this, we said, if you ever want to talk about it, I'm like, okay, let's set a date. Cause I was fascinated by anytime I look at something and think, and Bobby, I'll give you a high compliment right now. Probably Mark Verstegen was the last guy I looked at like this when I saw a guy, you're probably 20 years younger than me. At that time, Mark was 10 years younger than me. And I was like, okay, they're doing some really cool stuff that's probably better than what we're doing. And I need to figure out how to incorporate that into what we're doing. Like I need to, Anthony's got his Embrace the Suck t-shirt on. I need to embrace the struggle, rather than, be mad at, the gift world. I need to look at it and think, is there a way, like you said, is there a way I can look at this and say, okay, it's treasure. I need to figure out how do I incorporate it?
That's incredibly high honor and praise. And that means a lot. To revisit the ladder and the vector concepts, I think if we're gonna attack speed ladders, we got to get rid of jumping ropes too, because it's the same concept from a standpoint of, you can't look at a speed ladder and say, well, that doesn't coach agility. Yeah, I get that, but you could say the same thing about the vector system, the matrix system, whatever you want. But we can't throw out the fact that tissue extensibility, stability, density adaptations, those things are a part of agility independent of the neurological processes. So when you talk about a speed ladder, it's just like what you said, you're preparing the body for the contact, you're preparing the body for the tension and the forces. But with the vector system, it's the same, just an advancement from that. It's, you go from balance concepts to stability concepts to strength concepts to power and then speed concepts. There are curriculums that you can build for advancement on the vector system that apply from kindergarten to professional athletes to adults, and especially and obviously in the therapy world.
Yeah, no, there's no question. I mean, like I said, when I start doing rehab, I automatically find myself going back to that because I want to quantify. I want to look and think, okay, when I had a Premier League guy that I was working with that had hip surgery, and it was like, okay, when we start doing frontal plane stuff, I want to know exactly what the step length was, without me having to stick a tape measure between his feet, and getting on the functional training grid and suddenly saying, okay, we're going to go to, we're going to go to the second ring today, with our lateral lunge, and step back. And then we're going to go to the third ring. And then we're going to start, once we can get to the third ring, we're going to start to load that a little bit. And so I do find myself going there, but I need to figure out how I can go there, maybe in a bigger, better way.
Bobby, let's wrap the Strength Coach podcast portion of this up. Just kind of with your closing thoughts on, like, for example, if you were gonna, let's say you were going up to MBSC, where would you kind of consult? What would you say to somebody like Mike who's in a facility like that? Where would you start to kind of implement some of your system in there?
Well, I think first, you can't move away from what makes you successful. So that's the first thing, is identify your principles and stay true to that. And then figure out where this fits logistically and from a standpoint of what people are coming to you for. I mean, we realized quickly people weren't coming to us for bench press max. So it's identifying what moves the needle for your clients and making sure that you can integrate those things without creating logistical issues for the athletes and the coaches, and with creating as much benefit as possible. So that's definitely where I would start at. I don't think this is near as complicated as people think. I mean, you take a hex bar deadlift that most of this profession is doing, whether they're doing velocity-based concepts or just max strength concepts, you superset that with a leap forward on your first set, angle on your second set, lateral on your third set. You're integrating concepts that are going to cross over into performance gains, and that's a start. But there's a lot that you can do to look at programming and really stretch out this strength residual chart that we've known forever. And you integrate that with the concepts that I learned from Gary Gray, and I think you have some opportunity to pull out some unique athletic gifts from the clients you work with.
Love it. Well, hopefully we'll get you to maybe even, if you're not going to write the book anytime soon, get a couple articles up on strengthcoach.com so we can kind of start putting some things together here and have you come on the site if anybody has any questions. So Bobby, thanks so much for doing this.
Man, I appreciate you guys having me. I appreciate the kind words and look forward to the future.
All right, that's going to do it for episode 303 of the Strength Coach Podcast. Remember, you can try strengthcoach.com out 30 days, just $1. You'll have access to all the articles, videos, programs, as well as the best forum on the net. It's the only place to have full access to Coach Boyle. He's on every single day answering questions. To access that offer, go to strengthcoach.com, click the Join Now button to get started on your trial. Special thanks to Chris Poirier and the folks over at Perform Better. Remember, they got the free shipping on anything over $49. Also, the app is live. You can see amazing presentations from this year's virtual summer seminar series, as well as some of the top presentations from the earlier functional training summits. Check it all out at performbetter.com. Thanks to Coach Boyle and Bobby Stroupe for sharing their insights and philosophies into the world of strength conditioning and performance enhancement. Thanks to Naamly, helping build relationships through personalized communication so your members stay longer and pay longer. Don't forget, check out their website. Go to Naamly.com, Naamly.com, and use the referral code StrengthCoach to get started on your free 30-day trial. Thanks to Adam and Tim at Train Heroic. Coach Boyle and I both use Train Heroic to deliver all of our online training. You can get a free 14-day trial at trainheroic.com. Thanks to Jenny Rearick of Fit to Speak. Check her out and her services out at fit2speak.com. That's fit-to-speak.com. Thanks to Kevin Carr and Brendan Rearick. Check them out at certifiedfsc.com. My name's Anthony Rana. My book, Be Like the Best, consists of 50 interviews with top fitness pros, and after each interview is a Be Like, which is just an action step or a challenge that will help you be like the best. Check it out at belikethebest.com or check everything out at continuefit.com. That's going to do it. Thanks for listening, and I'll speak to you next time.